Welcome to Xogot's modular series on 3D game development. This video will introduce creating placeholder models directly in Xogot. This is helpful when you are ready to work on your game mechanics, but you don't have any models prepared yet. So we can do our prototyping here in Xogot and just get some temporary placeholders. We have two types of placeholders that we can add. MeshInstance3Ds, which are really good for performance, and they're going to be mostly basic shapes. We also have CSG models, that's short for Constructive Solid Geometry. They're very performance heavy, so it's really intended just for prototyping and not for finished games, but they can be combined together in really helpful ways to get more complex objects. I'm going to start by adding a MeshInstance3D, so I'm just going to add another node here, and everything up here at the top is going to be a mesh instance. So I can add a box, I can add a sphere, I can add a capsule, all sorts of different shapes that I can use. I'm just going to start with a box shape and add that in. You'll notice there are three different options. I can add it just as a mesh object, or I can also add it with some initial physics set up. So I can add it as a rigid body, or I can add it as a static body. I'm just going to add it as a mesh object for now. So I have my box mesh created. Probably should give this some sort of descriptive name. I'm going to open up the settings over here. Now, depending on the shape that you've chosen, there'll be different settings that we can adjust to customize it. So if I tap over here on the icon for the mesh, I have my settings here. So if I want to change the size, this is where I want to do it. So maybe I might have this longer. Oh, not quite that long. On the x-axis, maybe this is going to be some sort of wall that's going to be in the way. So maybe I'll also have this taking up some space vertically. So it's going to be some sort of obstacle. I should probably name that descriptively, but I'm just going to leave it for now. So I've customized the settings there for whatever size I want to be working with. I do want to mention that whatever shape you chose when you added the mesh instance isn't actually a permanent choice. So if I realize that I didn't want a box shape and I wanted something else, I can come over into the menu over here, go to the new settings, and you'll see there's just a variety of different mesh objects that you can add. So I can switch this to a capsule mesh or a cylinder or a plane, whatever makes sense for the particular object that I'm working with. And you'll notice that, actually let me just switch it to one for now. Let's change that to a cylinder. And you'll notice when you click on the icon for the mesh, depending on the shape that you've chosen, you'll have some different options for settings that you can change there. And I'm just going to do a 2-finger tap to undo that change. Now that that's back to my box shape, I'm going to make a material. So I'm just going to come over to the little menu here, add a new standard material. If I click on the material icon, I can set all sorts of different settings for the material. I'm just going to choose a color. Maybe this is going to be purple. All right, there we go. And all sorts of different settings that we can adjust depending on what sort of material you might want this to look like. So I can keep playing around and experimenting, but that should be good for now. So I have my object, I have my material. Back in the other settings, we have some geometry options. We can override the material here, which is helpful when you're doing scripting, and then just a lot of other settings that you can experiment with. We can choose the layer visibility. So is this going to be active on layer 1 and layer 2, or maybe just on layer 2, or maybe not on any layer at all? I have the transform settings for the position, the rotation, and the scale, but I shouldn't actually change the scale over here. I really, if I'm changing the size, should be doing that in the box size settings over here. And And then we have some additional visibility options over here, pretty much just like any other object. So that's really the basics of adding the mesh instances. All right, let's move on to CSG objects. Now, the CSG models, just like the mesh instances, do need to be set up with physics, but I'm just going to add one directly into the scene so you can see how it works. So I'm just going to go to add a node. I'm on the 3D tab, and at the bottom here, we have the different options for our constructive geometry. Now, normally when you're working with CSG, you're combining multiple shapes together. So I'm going to start with a combiner and just add that in. And again, if I was using this for something real, I would probably name that descriptively. But this just sort of helps everything stay organized. All the children get combined in the order that they're added. So I'm going to, with that selected, add another CSG object. Maybe this one will be a box shape, and I'll add that in. Gonna move that out of the other object there. And I'm going to also, with my combiner added, add maybe a cylinder. And I'm going to be using that to cut a hole in the other object. There we go. So with my first CSG object selected, over in the inspector, I can set the size over here, or I can hold on to the little red handles on the shape. Maybe this is going to be some sort of platform. If I want to sort of even out those numbers, I can make those corrections so that I'm satisfied with that. I'm going to move on to my cylinder. And I have a few different things that I could do with this second shape. Now, I can certainly play around with the radius, so I can make the cylinder bigger, I can make it smaller, I can change the size using the widget, or I can set the size over in the inspector, depending on what makes the most sense. I have some additional settings so I can play around with the size and make that look a little bit smoother. I can actually turn that into a cone if I prefer. I can keep the faces smooth or not. So several things I can set here. Actually, I can flip the faces as well so that I'm turning it sort of inside out. You'll see that behaves very differently. And then down a little bit further, this might be the most important setting right here for the operation. Union means I'm joining it together, so it's like this is a single object. I can change this to intersection so that it only keeps the part that is intersecting the other shape. Or I can set this to subtraction, where I'm just cutting out using this second shape. So lots of interesting things that we can do. And the same sort of settings that the mesh instances have. So I have some different geometry options. I have some visibility options. I can control what layer this is going to be on and whether it's actually going to be visible or not. All of those normal settings that we have for pretty much every object. So lots of things we can set there. I can choose my material. If I want to make a new one, I can, or I can quickly load another material that's available. So I might have this material applied. And actually, if I come over to the combiner, if I head over to geometry, I can override the material of both of them so that they share a material. Or I can come over into my second shape and I could either use an existing material or create a new one here. Maybe I want to use two different colors so that that whole is just shaded differently. It sort of depends on personal preference there. Maybe that'll be some sort of orangey red. All right, there we go. So that shape is all set. Now there's one other shape I wanted to show. So I'm just going to go back in, and then in the constructive geometry, I'm going to add a polygon. And I'm just going to put this off to the side a little bit. So the polygon CSG shape is really interesting because it's just extruding a shape based on whatever you have set in the array here. So you can add additional settings to the array depending on what exactly you want this shape to be working with. And we can pull around with the widget. We can adjust the settings in the array itself. We can play around with the depth of the shape. We can flip the direction of the faces again. We can smooth the faces out. We can give it a material. And we have some other modes here. Just going to get a little closer here and move this over to the side. There we go. All right, so the spin mode makes this almost like a screw. And so you can choose how many sides this is spinning along. Are the faces smooth or not? And all of the other standard settings here. All right, the last mode is path, and we actually need to add a path 3D. So I'm just going to add a path 3D. Since I'm using it with the polygon 3D, not a big deal having that as a child. I'm going to head over into the curve settings, and I'm just going to create a random array here. And I'm just going to randomly choose some different settings here. I'll add a couple of different points. And there we go. So I have this path that we can see. And back over in the polygon settings, under path node, I'm going to pick that path that I created. And we can see how that shape is completely customized based on the path here. So I can certainly experiment with all sorts of settings for the object as a whole. If I'm overlapping it with something else, I can choose the operation. Again, we have the visibility options, the geometry options, all of the standard options there. So have some fun experimenting, and we'll be back with more videos.